911 dispatchers of Reddit. What is a seemingly dumb call you got which turned out to be serious? Not a dispatcher. Was USAF security forces a long time ago. Call was a kid home alone. About a monster in the closet. Which was a bit weird. Because the kid seemed a bit old for that. Holy duck. There's a snake in the closet that's gotta be at least 150 pounds. Promptly close closet door. Nope, write the duck on out of that. Kid in hand. Called animal control. Called parent. Parent arrives first. Indicates they don't even own a snake. Let alone a people-sized snake. All parties agree monster in closet was accurate enough description of event. TLDR, monster in closet turned out to be real. Got a call where the caller was on the highway and just screaming. Couldn't figure out what was wrong because he was so amped up. Ended up being someone got hit by a semi-truck or something and the body parts were all over the highway. Yikes. One day, my buddy and I were having a beer. He'd been a firefighter for about a year then and he went into some detail about what happens when your car rolls over and you don't have a seat belt on. The doors pop open. You fly out of the car and the car rolls over you. He hated to respond to rollovers. Noise complaint. Neighbor playing music too loud and no complainant. Only reason an officer responded was because he was bored. Turns out it was a 14-year-old girl whose parents were out of town. She invited the 25-year-old man from a town 3 hours away to come over and have sex with her all night long. Cops showed up and found her. Him. Some beer and a bunch of condoms laying around. He went to jail. She went to the children's home till her parents could get back. This is more on the EMT side. And not really dumb, but all the time people call 911 and tell them someone, their parent, spouse, child etc. isn't responsive and breathing. It sucks when you get there and they are actually just having agonal respirations. Aka things just got way more serious. Agonal respirations are not sufficient breathing and are merely a reflex the body has when there's insufficient oxygen. A lot of times the family member didn't realize this was not adequate breathing and didn't start CPR. Allowing for brain damage via oxygen deprivation. Sad. Got a call from Life Alert one time. Saying that one of their clients was stuck in her kitchen because her wheelchair got stuck on a cupboard. She wasn't in duress, just needed to get unstuck. Wasn't an urgent call and it was a busy night, so the road SGT had to pull a unit off the call twice due to more urgent calls. After he pulled the second unit he said he would go and help her while the other calls were being handled. When she arrived the caller's front door was open with just the screen door in place. It was a nice day for a breeze. She could see the caller from the screen door and tried to ask if there was a way to unlock the screen or if she would have to cut it to get in. The caller was not responsive to our SGT, so she called on the radio that we should have FDN route and that she was going to have to cut the screen door to make entry. When our SGT made it in, she found that the caller was sitting in her chair at the sink and was washing dishes. The caller appeared to have dropped a knife and cut into her ankle. She was unable to bend down to stop the bleeding and was on blood thinners. She did not make it. Not dispatcher. But dumb call. I work at an urgent care. And a lady called and casually said her son was struck by lightning. He seemed fine. But his primary doc wanted her to take him in for an EKG and to check out his cardiac enzymes. Told her to go to the emergency room. And she said, "Well, can't you do an EKG? Itch. Your son was struck by lightning. He needs to be monitored, as these symptoms can show up later. His heart rhythm is probably ducked." Really late to the party, but it's worth telling. My center took a call from a number like 5 times in an hour. Always radio silence on the other end. On the 6th call we finally heard enough of a voice to know someone was there and got an address and enough to know it was serious. Make entry to the house and find the caller. A man had picked up his soon-to-be ex-girlfriend to talk. He then duct taped her mouth and zip tied her wrists and ankles and spent the next 14 hours beating her with a bat. Raping her. Used a blowtorch to give her second-degree burns all over her legs and genitals. And broke her cheekbone. It was an absolutely terrifying moment, and what made it worse was on review of the tape we could hear her say help on one of the previous calls, but couldn't hear it on the initial call-in. Probably doesn't fit dumb, but this guy called and told us he killed his entire family. None of us believed this could possibly true. Turns out he wasn't kidding. He sounded totally cool and collected when he called us too. Still haunts me. A call came in and this hard to understand man says my friend is sick, he's choking from too much penis. Turns out he said peanuts, his friend had a peanut allergy. Not an officer. I was hanging out with a few of my mates. We were playing truth or dare. One of my friends were dared to stand in cement until it had hardened. By the time we realized how dumb of an idea this was, he had become part of the ground. Luckily, dispatch came over the instant we called them. But we got a lecture about not wasting their time. We did the same thing 2 days later. Not mine but my cousin. Got a call from a young woman went like this. Cousin. 911 what's your emerg? Person. Mumbling whispering. Cousin. What I can't understand you mom? Person. Mumbling whispering. Cousin. What's the address? Person. Road. Cousin. Okay mom what's the problem? Person. Still whispering there's a giant man in my house. Cousin. Okay ma. Person. Screams bloody murder. So a story behind this is that the young girl was home alone and the girl's parents were at work. A man saw the house and since there was no cars there he thought no one was home and broke in through the window. And as he was breaking in she hid under her bed and called the cops. But the thing was she went under her bed where she wasn't facing the door, which means she couldn't see him walk in, and her foot was sticking out and he grabbed her legs and pulled her out and stabbed her, but she survived thankfully. So yeah. So we got a call from a couple a few years back that said they had ate edibles and thought they were gonna die and all that. Obviously we thought they were just anxious from the marijuana. It turned out when we got to their apartment that the marijuana they had gotten was laced and we had to rush them to the emergency room because when we got there they were passed out. So that's my story Reddit. My uncle was a cop and I was with him by his car and got this call. A person said her daughter was going to be arrested and wanted to know what she did wrong. They were puzzled and thought it was a prank call. A lady called saying her daughter called her because she was pulled over at the garbage dump and police were searching her because they spotted a couple of empty beer boxes in the back of the truck she was driving. The officer wasn't listening to her when she said she was taking them to the dump. The police said it is probably a story because none of their officers were on that road. My uncle was out on patrol and saw another officer. He radioed and asked if there was anyone at the dump. He said he didn't know of any of the officers being there. My uncle responded to the scene and found a girl pulled over. My uncle stopped the scene to find out it was a fake cop. Not me, but I had a friend whose dad was a cop tell me that they had someone lying naked in the road at an AskReddit race. When they got there they found that the guy had multiple guns strapped to his chest and they had to work to defuse the situation. Had a hang up 911 call just before shift change. Flow procedure and call back. Get mom on the phone who said small child was playing with phone. We sent someone from roll call out. When I got back 8 hours later it was brought back up to me because the 7-year-old playing with the phone was actually calling 911 because mom bit a large hole in her cheek. The opposite. I had a woman screaming and crying that her boyfriend had been shot. The whole police department and fire EMS respond to shooting calls. She was extremely rude and didn't finish EMD protocol with me. Didn't answer on call back. Turns out she verified the wrong address. And her boyfriend was hot. Not shot. She had misunderstood him. Got a call for debris in the road on the main highway heading into town. It was outside our town limits, but was passed on to us as it was pretty close. And the sheriff's department was going to take a while to get to it. We often took small calls like this as a courtesy to their depth. Once the officer arrived, he discovered the debris was what was left of a motorcyclist in a HT and run. The body was in pretty bad shape, most likely hit by a semi, and had been subsequently run over by other motorists not realizing what it was. It gets pretty dark out in the desert. and the body looked more like someone had dropped some old clothes off the back of their truck or something. We had to track down the lady who made the original call. As it turned out, she was in the local convenience store. We discovered one of his arms had flipped up and become lodged in the grill of her car as she ran over it. Along with dealing with the original call, we had to call an ambulance as the lady panicked and went into shock when she saw the arm. Ended up being a long night. After the initial investigation phase, the whole thing was turned over to the sheriff's department. I never did hear if they caught the guy who hit him. Sometimes people call on 911 for non-threatening things and vice versa. So it doesn't surprise me when the first line is, "I don't know if this is an emergency or not." So while at work one of those comes in. "I don't know if this is an emergency, but I just saw a man shoot out the back window of a car while it was taking off." Yeah. That would qualify. Mom. Then about 4 minutes later, I get the 911 call from the girlfriend of the victim. She was driving her boyfriend to the hospital. Not me. But my cousin is a paramedic in a small town in Texas. They had received many calls from a family with a diabetic teen daughter over the years. Usually every instance was not an emergency. These calls from the parents started coming in more often and typically the symptoms were mild to moderate. Certainly not life-threatening. They always advised the parents how to manage her condition so these calls wouldn't have to happen. Late one night the parents called complaining that their daughter appeared sick. My cousin and the paramedics thought it was a typical non-emergency case and didn't rush to the scene. The station was 20 minutes away. My cousin couldn't have known the seriousness at the time. The parents just said their daughter was sick looking. When they arrived she was dead from diabetic shock. My cousin thinks she died minutes before they arrived and years later still regrets not rushing to the scene. Got a call of a one-vehicle accident. Standard. Turns out it was my 15-year-old cousin who burned to death and there was another vehicle involved with a mom. Dad and 2 daughters under the age of 10 in the vehicle. Family in the other vehicle were okay. Dad had a broken leg and mom had a cracked hip. If I remember right. Little girls were unharmed. I was the caller. 3 weeks from Christmas. Pearson Airport in Toronto. Abdi living in the woods on the edge of the property near HWY 401. Arguably the busiest highway in North America. Well, the fence was down and there was a deer on the edge of the 401, so I called to report a doe on the road. The operator said, "A doe?" I said, "Lord forgive me, but I couldn't help myself." "Yes. A doe. A deer. A female deer." She laughed. I laughed. A truck swerved so as not to hit the deer and took out 2 lanes of traffic. We stopped laughing. I'm not a dispatcher, but I work in crime intelligence. So we monitor the radio so we know what's going on. Last night there was a call about a car accident. It wasn't portrayed as a big deal. Possible small fender bender. But the dispatcher specified that there were multiple tickets out for it. Scout says they're on the way. Less than 2 minutes later, dispatcher comes back saying they're getting calls about an assault and battery at that same intersection. This very quickly turned into a fatal assault. Not sure if this counts. My mom is a 911 dispatcher. But one day she got this call about a woman who was lying in a ditch. The caller was the woman's neighbor, who didn't even bother to get out and check on her. Who said that she was staring up with a glare on her face, like she was mad about falling into the ditch or something. So my mom dispatches an officer and they find out that the woman was getting her mail and started to have a heart attack. Kinda sad that the neighbor didn't bother to get out to check on her. But whatever. People are TTY sometimes. A girl around the age of 13 called in a panic because she got her younger sister stuck in a basket inside of a closet. Every time the little sister would try and move, it would bring more pain to her. At first I thought it was a joke, but the distress in the girl's voice convinced me to send out someone to aid her. Turns out the younger sister's was wedged sideways into the basket and it was stuck at an angle in the doorway of a closet. We managed to get her out without bringing her harm.